Ladies and gents, students, thanks for joining us. I'm here with a special guest today. This is Dr. Kelly Elkins coming from Towson University out in Maryland. So first of all, Dr. Elkins, thank you so much for your time and being here today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We are super excited. We got in touch through another forensic scientist, and through there, you were saying how you are involved with some really cool and interesting stuff in the world of forensics. But first of all, Dr. Elkins, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your job in that? And then I'd love to eventually dive into kind of what do you do on the daily in that. But anywhere you want to go from there, we'd love to just start learning about you.
Great, yeah. So I am a professor of chemistry at Towson University. If you want to know where I started, I was interested in science in middle school, and I took biology and chemistry and physics like many high schoolers do in high school.
We like that. That gives me a job. I like that.
Right. And I was pretty good at biology, and chemistry and physics were hard, and I didn't do so well. So when I went to college, I decided I would study in biology. So I chose a biology major. The curriculum included the fact that you have to take chemistry. And I hadn't done so well in chemistry in high school, so that was pretty scary. And you also have to take physics. So even bio majors have to take chemistry and physics. I was a scholarship student, so it was really important for me to keep my grades up, to keep the scholarship. And again, that chemistry class was kind of scary looking on my first year course schedule. But lo and behold, the second time around, things clicked. And I think it's good to let students know that sometimes we just need to try it again and again. And eventually we do get it. And so I kept my biology major and I graduated with a degree in biology. And then I actually added a chemistry major before the end. So I had 2 degrees by the end of the 4 years. And like you, I was going to become a high school teacher. So I did secondary education classes. I did everything except student teach. I had that lined up. And one of my college professors said, why aren't you considering going to graduate school? And I think coming from a small town in New Hampshire and with parents who hadn't gone to graduate school and didn't really understand that path, the thought had not really occurred to me. And so at that point, it was a very late start date to really start researching graduate school. One of my professors made some calls, and I landed at Clark University for graduate school. And it was a terrific decision. It was a great fit for me. It was small and personal. And after 5.5 years, I earned a degree in biochemistry and a PhD from my graduate work. And so then, like many faculty do, I did a postdoctoral fellowship before becoming a professor. That's a pretty typical track. So you do 5+ years of research to earn a PhD, and then you go do more research to prove that then you are qualified to be on your own and to compete in the job market, right? So it's competitive. There are a lot of people who are really smart and who can do these jobs. So you need as much training as possible. So I went to MIT in the biology department, and I studied protein design, and from both an experimental and a computational side. So I did a lot of complicated calculations. So it's really important for students to study as much math as they can. And biology majors typically only require calculus, but I always tell students, if you can handle it, take more math. You don't need to necessarily get an A, but that experience and that training is only going to help you. And so then after my postdoctoral fellowship, at that point, my husband was in the Army. And so we took a tour of the country. So I've taught at several colleges and universities in several states. So I began in a community college teaching students interested in biology and chemistry, and then continued and taught at 4-year colleges and universities, and now at Towson.
Well, that's awesome. What a path, too. That's cool. I love that chem was kind of in high school, and then it was something that kind of you enjoyed and were passionate about and followed further and ended up with a double major. That's super cool. And I thank you for explaining the doctorate and then the postdoc. I don't know if a lot of students often look that far out, and it's great to just have that mindset of, oh, these are the options. And once you get your doctorate, you still have to, like you said, prove yourself that you can publish and things like that. So I thank you. That's wonderful information. So now you're here at Towson University, and we see behind you, you have a forensics chemistry book. We know you're published, you're an author, you're associate professor, you're doing a lot of things. Could you kind of talk us through, like, what does your daily life look like? Because you are this professor in that, what does it look like for you on the daily?
Sure. So I have thought long about what does my typical day look like?
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure if there is a typical day, right? And I think that's part of the fun of the job is that my days are varied and the number of students I work with is large and it's a lot of fun. I like the students. I love their energy and I like the unique perspectives they bring and the ideas. I mean, it really makes me think of things that I hadn't thought of. I start my day by early in the morning opening emails and responding to student concerns and responding to questions from my chair or my dean. And then I usually get my children off to school when we do go to school. This morning it was getting them off to school at home and then go to work. Usually the first thing I do is check in my lab, see the students, see if anybody's shown up and if the students are working in lab, ask them what they're working on, help them out solving problems, troubleshooting if they're having any questions or issues with the experiment that day. If they have new data, I love data. And so if they show me new data, I get all geeked out and I'm excited to see the data and interpret that with them. And then, I'll go to my office, prep for class, go lecture and explain chemistry to students, teach chemistry, stay after class, usually answering questions, may have office hours where we answer questions, and then teach laboratory classes. So I may have to prep for lab and go teach a lab class, which is great because then I get to interact with students a lot more one-on-one, which is one of my favorite parts of the job. I don't really like being in a large lecture class, having to teach to 50 students and trying to have all the answers. I don't claim to have them all at this point. And then, after lab, usually there's a certain amount of tidying up and clean up that you have to do when the students leave. And then I kind of do my rounds after, right? You go back to the lab, check on the students who are working on independent research projects, check more emails, and then finally go home and then start thinking about what's the next day going to look like and grading papers and all of that. We talked about the books and I've been lucky enough to publish a couple of books, but most of that work happens on school breaks and in the summer.
Sure.
Hard to find time during the normal semester to write, but I do make it a point to try to write often and write a little bit every day. And I think that keeps the momentum going.
I like that. And thank you for explaining. And just to clarify, so you as a professor, you're not only teaching classes and running labs for students, but you also have your own lab that has some students helping alongside of you with research, but also potentially doing their own research as well.
Right. Some of the questions are student driven. They come up with the questions. They say, I want to research DNA recovery from the surface, whether it be like Under Armour or the Timberland boots are particularly troublesome or fur-lined gloves. So different kinds of substrates or surfaces. So we'll work with them on those projects, right? I'll help them with the methods, which I have a lot more experience in and they're still learning, but they're straightforward. And so, and there are a lot of commercial products, so they tend to work. And so the students can conduct the experiments and get results and be able to interpret them. Some of the projects are more driven from my side. They're more my idea or a team project, right, that has some amount of funding or backing from the university. And so one of them that we're working on right now is with a colleague from the anthropology department.
Yeah.
And she has been working with the Maryland Department of Transportation for many years. She's a former crime scene investigator, as well as a faculty member. And so she gets called in on cold cases to help the law enforcement because she has these relationships from her past work to interpret whether bones that are recovered from sites are human or not human. And then, Maryland's a very old state. So, and yet we're still building. We're building everywhere. We're in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. We're just outside of Baltimore, our area. And so there's it's an attractive place to live and work. And so the builders are constantly making new apartment buildings and townhouses and houses, right? People have to live somewhere. And there are new roads associated with that as well. And so in excavating and building, occasionally excavators happen upon old graves that were unmarked and
Ah,
human remains. And so then my colleague gets called in to help analyze and identify those. And from an anthropology point of view, she can do things like estimate age and estimate sex and estimate whether there were injuries or if they died of disease. And so she can do a lot of things just by looking at the bones. We've gotten involved more recently because we're able to do some really advanced DNA work using next generation sequencing. So we can do a lot more fragments of DNA than's typically been analyzed for forensic purposes. And we're able to now, with the techniques we're using, not only also determine the sex, which complements her work, right? We can determine if we are getting the same answer, right? But we can also determine an estimation of phenotype, like what eye color or skin tone or hair color the person had, and their ancestry, so their biogeographical ancestry. Are they probably from Europe, European, or of African ancestry or Asian ancestry? And so that's pretty exciting, right? Because she can't tell all of that necessarily from just looking at the bones. And sometimes if you have a full skeleton, she can do a lot more with that than if she has, say, a single tooth. And yet using that single tooth, we can extract DNA and be able to get all this information. So we look at it as complementary, right? Sometimes the samples she can do quite a lot with, and for whatever reason, our DNA profile is subpar. And other times we get a great profile, we can add substantially to what she's able to tell.
wow, what a cool thing then. So you're interacting with other areas or departments like anthropology and that. And so using these DNA strategies for extraction, you can tell a lot more and just support the overall information to understand that situation where that body, who that potentially was in that.
Right, right.
Wow.
That's part of the question, right? Is who were these people?
Yeah.
Right? So she's looking at other artifacts too, right? If there were pipes or glassware, home materials that people would use to live and work. We're really interested in human identification, and that's what has been our focus. But we are interested in being able to understand what were the relationships between the people. Were all the individuals, if there's a child and then some adults, was the child related to the adults? Mm. And of what background? And if there were injuries or disease, which ethnicity were those people? And trying to understand the structures of the people buried together and who were the people, what was the relationship?
Wow. We all hear about DNA, but when you get to see like the value and the uses that it can bring is really cool and incredible. So if you don't mind, I guess my next question would be, if we do have students who are interested in the world of forensics or really are digging the chemistry and the biology in school and that, and may want to eventually dabble in this world of DNA and that, what's a good suggestion or pathway to get there? Is it a major in biochemistry? Is it a major in biology and then doing a graduate school? Or could you just kind of walk us through what might help them set up for success if they're interested going towards that field in forensics?
Yeah, sure. So I think it depends on what level they want to start working at. There are entry points at any level, whether you're a technician and you're assisting in the lab, or you're a scientist, or you're a project manager. So I think you can enter at various levels, and obviously those take different levels of education, but this is a lifelong journey, and not everything has to happen immediately. So it's good to just get started. The forensic field is interested in hiring scientists. So the students should major in a STEM major, right? So chemistry, biology, physics, and also it could be a subfield like microbiology or genetics. So that would be the first thing. There are also forensic science degrees across the country now. There have been some for over 30 years, but they're popping up more and more. And students should just carefully evaluate those and make sure that they're found foundationally in a science area. So many of those degrees are out of a chemistry department or out of a biology department, And so has usually those curricula have a deep underpinning in natural sciences. And so that's what the student should look for. If the forensic science program is out of criminal justice, it may not be the right fit to work in the lab or even to start, as a crime scene technician, because they are looking for scientists to understand what the capabilities of the lab are, what the lab can do. So when they're evaluating and collecting evidence, then they're going to be able to send the best representative samples to the lab and collect them and process them to give the lab the best shot at getting a profile or a determination, right, of the chemical composition.
Oh, that's great advice too. I never thought about that. There's kind of different pathways to get involved with it. And you're right, that would require different training and different levels of understanding. So yeah, thank you. That clarified that quite a bit.
Many students will get a bachelor's degree,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an opportunity, of course, to go to graduate school, and they can pursue, for example, a Master of Science in Forensic Science, or a degree again in genetics or chemistry. Analytical chemistry is also quite useful. And those are typically essential to become, say, a technical lead or a manager, right, of a sub area in the lab. And many of the lab directors even have PhDs. So that can be another path as well. Certainly the faculty at US colleges and universities primarily have PhDs. And so if they're interested in going the route I did, then they will need to eventually go to graduate school and complete a doctorate. But you can even do that while working. I have some friends and colleagues that have done that while working, and work full time and do this on the side. It might take 9-10 years, but again, if your goal is to get that, you just got to keep with it slowly. It's certainly easier, I think, to do this right after college, before you have a lot of financial commitments and family commitments, where you can put all your time and energy into studying and being immersed in the lab. But that doesn't mean there's not another path. So yeah, they should definitely focus on the science. Of course, an MBA is quite useful if they want to manage, and that can be another path as well.
Thank you. That was all great, just ideas. And I love when students can kind of see the different paths they can take and what works with them. And like you said, there is flexibility. Some of us, it's going to take longer and you need to work right away. Some of us, we can do it all at once. So the options are there. I like that. So thank you for pointing that out. Do you have any big goals or that you're hoping to tackle in the future, of that with your lab, or that any big questions that you haven't gotten to hammer out yet, but you'd like to? I know that's probably a huge question to ask. And then also just any tips or suggestions about life, work, education, anything at all for the students that you'd just like to share.
Sure. So, the area that I've gotten into working with the anthropologists, we only got into this a couple of years ago. And so that's really exciting. I've been writing books for, it's been about 10 years now. And that all started, I never set out to be a writer. I'm an avid reader. I love to read, and I always loved mysteries as a kid. I went to publish a curriculum paper when I was early in my tenure of being a professor. And the reviewers asked, well, then we need all the supplementary materials, right? So you have this curriculum paper, but what about all those labs that you're describing? And I thought, well, geez, that's a lot of material, a whole semester's worth of labs. So then I set out to find a publisher for those labs to be able to get this curriculum paper published. So that started like a 2-year journey. So I submitted proposals to publishers and was able to secure a publisher, and that led to the publishing of my lab manual. And eventually, I did get that curriculum paper published. That took quite a while. So sometimes things go in a very circuitous path that you didn't plan. And once you finish one project, right, people like people who finish projects. And so then I had a second publisher contact me and say, we saw you finish this project, you made this lab manual. Would you be interested in writing a book for us on forensic chemistry? And so I was abroad at the time for a big birthday, and I said, okay, great, I'll contact you when I get back. We had a great conversation, and that led to that project for a few years.
Wow.
Then I started teaching this new class on next generation sequencing for forensics and DNA applications. We've got a new undergrad and grad class on that we put through the curriculum. And I reached out to my publisher and I said, would you want a book on this? They said, oh, yeah, we do. So we just finished that. I submitted it in January. I co-wrote it with my colleague that we've been working with this for the last couple of years. And so that's forthcoming, as well as I'm now the editor of a new series on counterfeit drugs. And so I've got a volume that I'm working on with a bunch of authors. It's going to be a fabulous book. And I'm surveying crime labs across the country on their trends. Right now, I'm collecting data. I'm going to write that up as a chapter for the book. And then separately, I've been working a lot with my national society, the American Chemistry Society, which you can be a member as well. And so I'm very involved in volunteering for them, helping with programming for national meetings. But one of my efforts is on the ethics committee. So I'm a member of the Committee on Ethics. And one of the long-serving members and a former colleague and I are editing a book on ethics and in international ethics for chemistry. And so we're working on that again this semester. So those are new projects. I haven't been an editor before, but I figured that I can learn. And I think that that's the thing, right, that I love about this job. I get to constantly learn. I'm constantly tackling new projects and ideas, and I get to reach out and be involved with working with great scientists and learn from them. And yeah, so it's really, I mean, it's really great. And I think, you know, for the students, once you prove that you can learn, there are a lot of opportunities that opened up. I was a biology major and a chemistry major, and certainly I got great academic training on those. My family says I shouldn't advertise this, but I never took a class in forensics, right? I never took a class in forensic chemistry. They didn't offer it at my university or my college. And so, you know, all of this you learn on the job, and if you keep reading and researching and working with people, you can gain a lot of expertise and even become an expert in the field.
Thank you. A couple of things you said that just really resonated. I love too, you're just the demonstration of always constantly lifelong learning in that. It looks like you are constantly pushing yourself, new projects, new goals, and that it's interesting where the career's taken you, where now you're a successful published author that continues to do that. I think that's wonderful that you're saying yes to new things. And I think it's paid off in your career and it looks like your satisfaction of your job and career as well. If there's anything else you wanted to add, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I think for students, just tell them that reach out, talk to us, talk to their teachers, talk to their professors. We have office hours, come, but we're really here for you. And that's why we chose this profession. Every day, honestly, me building my network, me doing these things and researching with students, it's all really to help them reach their career goals and to help them be able to find jobs. And so I hope that they're using me, using my network, and using what they've learned, working together to be able to do that.
Well said. Dr. Elkins, this has been wonderful. You took us through your jam-packed days, but really, yeah, I can't imagine it would be hard to ever get bored with that job when it's always changing like that. You have so many different avenues going on, but that they all relate to each other. So I think it's fascinating. I just think it's opened up a lot of ideas for potential different careers, interests, whether in the university or in the lab or through the police force and crime scene investigations and that, working for a county. So this has really shed a lot of light. So we appreciate your knowledge and just your time today. So thank you so much, Dr. Elkins.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.